Welcome to the Takeoff Podcast, the go-to construction podcast for construction professionals seeking inspiration, education, or motivation for the next steps in their career. Each Monday, you'll be joined by me, Mick Donaghy, Managing Director of Gedden Executive Recruitment and a respected name from the industry, a construction leader, a business owner, or someone in the thick of the action. The whole premise of this podcast is for you to get something from it, an idea, a connection, a mentor, whatever it is. I hope you get it, and I hope you enjoy the show. Without further ado, let's get into it. Well, Damien, welcome to the Takeoff Podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to sit down and have a chat with you today. For the people that don't know you, Damien, do you mind sort of giving us a bit more of an introduction to who you are and what you do?
Sure, Mick. So my name's Damien. I am a builder developer. I'm based out of Sydney, New South Wales. I've been doing this 2 decades. I've spent my entire life, my entire career in building. Something I love. I'm passionate about what I do. I love being a builder. I love being a developer, and I want to make a change. I want to leave a legacy, and I want to do some good in the industry. Beyond just building and making money, I want to make a difference. That was a big driver for me saying yes to be on here, mate, to be heard. So I think that's me in a nutshell. Yeah.
No, excellent, Damien. No, so this is long time in the works getting this put together, mate. Thanks for joining me today. So what I'm really keen to do is unpack a bit more about your experience in the industry. You've been very vocal over the last number of months. I've been really noticing you on LinkedIn with some of your passion, stuff that you're passionate about within housing and residential and construction and that sort of thing. So talk to me. How did you get involved in the industry? And I guess tell me a bit more about where you grew up, what that was like.
Well, I grew up in a place called Liverpool, on the outskirts of Sydney, Sydney's west. I grew up in a South Italian family. My family is from the south of Italy, a place called Calabria. So growing up, being in an immigrant family, a lot of concreters, a lot of carpenters turned builders, turned developers. I have a lot of family members that are in property. I have my father, who is a solicitor. He's retired now. He's moved on in his years, and funnily enough, his retirement plan. He drives a forklift now at the markets for fun. So, but growing up as a younger man, it was very handy having a solicitor as a father, because he was a great resource. I learned a lot from him, which is tied into my career. But I grew up around property. Like I said, I wanted to go buy a property. I'd go talk to one of my uncles or a cousin, show him the property or it was, land we wanted to subdivide or something that we thought had potential. And then I'd go home, take it to my dad. And then usually I'd get the legalities all laid out for me from my father.
I'm an immigrant as well. So, when you're growing up and you've got, you're always looking out for each other, aren't you? You're always sort of like your cousins and your uncles, and, you build this sort of like real common, everyone's got each other's backs. Everyone's looking out for each other. Is that the way you sort of brought up, Damien?
Yeah, growing up, the family was very close. It was, I think, we're a passionate family. It was definitely, there was a lot of tempers, a lot of opinions being thrown around. It wasn't Christmas time. Wasn't a quiet. It wasn't a quiet time. It was a very loud time. So, but in all saying that, all the chaos and the fury and the volatility, they laid a lot of love. And that's what really incubated my career in construction. And funnily enough, nobody in my family thought growing up I was going to be a builder or a developer. Everyone thought I was going to follow a career in academics. Even myself, I never thought it wasn't until probably I was about 18 or maybe 19. So I had always had, from the age of about 14, I had always odd jobs, school holidays, weekends, worked with uncles, worked with cousins. My first job, I was a brickies labourer, carried gyprock. One of my uncles, an architect. I remember helping him out and learn. I think I was 15, 16, learned AutoCAD. I learned how to draw. I learned the basics. And it's never something I thought that was going to become a career. And so a fun little anecdote about me, and it's not something I talk about too often, but I represented Australia as a powerlifter. And I started powerlifting at about the age of 13. And I wasn't half bad at it. I was a big, strong kid. So sort of kind of worked well for me on job sites, being this big, strong lad. And they'd always make me move all the heavy stuff and push all the heavy barrows. And they'd always seem to load extra bricks in those barrows too. And to this day, I've never understood why those barrows were always bigger. They were always bigger than everyone else's. But anyway, leaving school, the intent was to become a physiotherapist and still working all these odd jobs. I was studying, I went into university initially. So before all the further tertiary stuff that I did later on in life, I was starting to become a physio. And I needed a job. My father was he was a stoic man, and there was no such thing as no job. Hey, you work. His famous line was, "Boy, you got 2 arms, you got 2 legs, you work." So that was it. And I think that sort of sums up the work ethic that, was held by my father and what was expected of us, which did later come into play, and I'm very grateful for it. But I went into uni and I needed a job. One of my uncles said, "Hey, come with me and do carpentry, and I'll give you 1 day a week, go study." So I started carpentry, and I remember I did it for a year, or it was about a year and a half into it. And I'll never forget, after about a year and a half of doing carpentry and getting better at it, and I enjoyed it. I loved going to work, and I hated going to university. Hated it, but I loved going to work, and it was brutal. And one thing I'll say before I go on, and this is where I'm very grateful and thankful that I had the father I had, as he was a tough man. But I'll never forget my first day working with my uncle as a carpenter. I'll never forget this. Man, I was 18, and he was showing me around the job site. And there was a foreman and a labourer had a dispute, and I happened to have a broom. My first job working for my uncle, he gave me a broom, as every 18-year-old did back. We're talking 2 decades ago. That was the rule of thumb. You get the broom. Once you learn how to use the broom, then you get the hammer. Anyway, a fight broke out between a foreman and a labourer, and I ended up being right in the middle. And I think I looked 34 when I was 18, because I was a big boy. I lifted weights. I had a full beard. And I remember trying to break up this fight and getting punched in the head. I remember my eyebrow got split open. That was my first day. And my uncle came along, and I ended up after having copped a few to the head, I ended up breaking this fight up, and a few other of the workers came and sort of separated the boys. My uncle comes along after all the commotion is over, and he says, "And you need to understand, Mick, you have to understand the way my uncle or my family, the people I worked around, spoke. All right, it wasn't a refined. There was no diplomacy. There was no articulation. It was a brutal, archaic language. It was either half broken English Italian, or just, there was no please, no thank you, and lots of the F words. Comes along, raises his eyebrow, doesn't say a word. What happened? So after this long pause, I said, "What happened?" I'm trying to explain. He says, "Shut up," like that. I said, I tried to do the right thing, and he says, "Did you learn your lesson?" I said, "What lesson?" I said, "What lesson was there?" And he just sort of, "You'll understand." I still to this day don't know what that meant. I don't know what lesson I was supposed to learn from getting punched in the head. But anyways, he rang my mother, and my mother said, "How's his first day?" And my uncle's response was, "Yeah, it was great. He's cleaning up the blood now." What? Cleaning up the blood? Yeah. And my mother's freaking, what? And you got to, again, all the Italian. Now when they start to stress, they speak Italian. I can hear them. My mother's in Italian. I'm like, "What's the big deal? He got punched in the head." No context. Anyway, that was my first day. That was my first full-time job in construction. Was my first day. And I still look back at it now, and I think, could there be a better first day to the industry? Now, unfortunately, at the time, I wasn't bright enough to run, and I stuck with it. And my uncle would say every day, "Run, get away now, because once you're in it, you'll never leave." And again, looking back 20 years later, he was right. But all of this is getting to about a year and a half in. I went outside and I said to my father, who was cleaning gutters, I'll never forget, I looked up, I said, "Dad, I want to be a carpenter." He said, "Son," he looked down from the ladder. He said, "Son, finish your degree, do whatever you want. I'll support your son. Finish your degree." Which I'm glad he did. And at the time, being young and not mature enough to understand it, and I'm glad. Even later on, some of my mentors, it ties into what advice some of my later mentors gave me. Steve Rogers, who is the CEO of Cleary Brothers now. Something he told me later on. So I'm very glad I finished it. But I learned to love education. I learned to love to learn. And don't get me wrong, I was pretty good at school. I have ADHD. And so some things at school were difficult for me. But so learning wasn't this process that I enjoyed until later in life. But anyway, 18, 19, I eventually, I stuck it out. I got my degree. I went on further to study more, got a few more degrees and diplomas and whatnot under my belt after I became a carpenter. But my roots are as a carpenter. And so I always say, I'm a carpenter before I'm an academic. And probably the greatest attribute I have as a leader is the fact that I've been in the trenches. And I don't mean for a day or two. I see so many leaders or senior execs or senior, not senior, I shouldn't cut that bit out. I've seen so many leaders in the industry claim to have pragmatic experience or claim to know what it's like. And, we'll talk about it later when we talk about what I think of the state of education and how we train our up-and-coming project managers. But, being a labourer for a couple of months, helping your dad on a renovation, mate, and I think a lot of people will come back at that and say, you don't need, how important really is it? Or, maybe it's an archaic way of thought. But if you believe that, if you don't think that, in specific to our industry, and again, look, there's always exceptions to the rule, but I think the best thing, I think all young project managers, all these young builders, wanting to grow up to be construction managers, project managers, the most valuable lesson, most valuable experience, call it what you will, the roots that grow into the ground, the foundation that you lay, whatever, is go and work, do a job you hate for 12 months and do a hard job for 12 months. And ideally, do them at the same time. All right? Do a hard job and do a job you hate for 12 months in the industry. Because you will learn what it's like for the men in this industry and women in this industry. Most of the people in this industry are in it because they had no choice. They fell into it by means of necessity. They may be immigrants. They may not have had the opportunity to go to uni or go to school or whatever it may be, but learning to manage and lead people and men and women that come to work every day and hate their job and are unhappy because the reality is depression and poor state of mental health in this industry. That's rife. It is, mate. So it's suicide. We've got the highest suicide rates.
Highest suicide rate in any sector in the world. Yeah. I seen two people yesterday, both in construction, came up on my LinkedIn, both had committed suicide. One was a brand new mother who had just given birth a month ago. And the other one was a young 22-year-old, treaty, it's horrendous to see. It's absolutely shocking. But I mean, there is so much to unpack from that. So, you started off as the son of an immigrant family, working through the industry, going down, considering two ways of academia, going down the more hands-on trade route. What do you feel you really learnt from, I guess, that hands-on experience compared to maybe, say, the education side of things, Damien? Right, guys, so I'm absolutely pumped to say the Takeoff podcast is proud to be sponsored by RIB Software, the company behind some of the leading estimating software in the entire planet, including Costex, Candy, CX, and more. So firstly, if you didn't know, RIB are a powerhouse at providing innovative software solutions to the construction and engineering markets. They have over 500,000 users globally, are known universally as a solution provider for your entire project lifecycle, from planning to construction and beyond. RIB solutions help to ultimately connect people, processes, and data, so your project comes within budget, on time, and to the quality desired, all whilst reducing your business's carbon footprint. All this stuff matters, and RIB has the solutions. So if you're interested in finding out more, get on over to rib-software.com, reach out to your local team and quote Takeoff Podcast. For every listener who buys a subscription of RIB Costex, they will provide one free online training course. Okay, guys, back to the episode.
Like I said before, I know not everyone is going to agree with me. Not everyone's going to agree that hands-on experience is necessary to be a great leader. And yes, there are exceptions to the rule. And we're talking specifically about the building industry.
Yes.
And I'll try and compress it, okay? Because this alone, like I could sort of unravel this and lay this out. It'd take me half an hour, but I'll compress it for you. You have to learn to manage the unmanageable.
When you finished university, what did you do then? What did you move on to at that point?
Well, so when I finished uni, I was working with my uncle. Now, my uncle's name is Ivan, right? And I want to talk a little bit about Ivan. Ivan, he was a brutal man. Now, when I did my trade with him, and again, doing a degree in the trade at the same time, it almost killed me as a young man, but I soldiered through it. And again, I think that period, learning to suffer and sacrifice is important. But when I would go to work, I remember hating. Now, I was very, you need to understand, this is my uncle. Now, he was the most brutal human that I had ever encountered at that point. And he made my life a living hell. He said to me one day, you know what my job is? I said, no. Now, he was the construction manager for the company. It was a larger company at that point. He said, my job is to make you quit. Remember, I was 18 or 19. I think I was 18.
Yeah.
He said, my job is to make you quit. He goes, you know what your job is? I said, what? He goes, to not quit. He said, every day I come to work, I'm going to try my hardest to make you quit. Now, again, I think in this day and age, a lot of the methods he used, I don't think would fly. I think the HR department would have a field day with him. I think he'd probably set some records in the HR department, or any HR department. But back then, it was different. It was a different time. You know, this was the time when we hand nailed hardwood. You know, and this was a pre-LVL and stuff. Yeah. So, anyways, he said, if you're going to survive me, you will survive anything. And that were his exact words, and I still remember them. They're burnt into my brain. And they're words that I use when I teach now. I know I mentor a lot now, and I still tell this story. And so for that 3 or 4 years I was with him, I remember the first year, I hated it. I hated it so much. But I remember I would think of my father. Now, at the time, my father worked 2 jobs, right? And he was a solicitor by day and he lectured law at night. And he did this for a long time. My father worked very hard to provide for our family, and it's something that I admire more and more as time goes on, especially becoming a father myself. But I remember on the first day I wanted to quit, and I just remember thinking of my father. If I go home and say to my father, I quit because something was too hard, that'd break his heart. If I told him I wasn't happy, if I want to do something different, he'd support me 100%. But if I told him I quit because it's too hard on the first day, this is a man that works 2 jobs and at one point in his life worked 3 jobs, right? If I told him something was too hard, it'd break his heart. So I remember I persevered. And so I persevered. The work itself was hard, but I was relatively accustomed to it. It was more so the brutality of my uncle. And after about a year and a half, my attitude changed. And I said, you know what? Before the passion came along, it was a sense of, I'm not going to let you beat me. And again, fast forward 10 years and I realized the lesson, but at the time I didn't. So working every day with my uncle who was a brutal man, I said, I'm not going to let you break me. And so it was almost from a place of hatred, right? So I hated him with a passion. I didn't care about the work. It wasn't a point. And he'd always throw these little things at me like, I was a foreman by 21. So I'd quit back with, well, I'll be a foreman by 20. Again, not fully understanding the point of the lesson. But regardless, I went on and I survived. And then after, fast forward probably 2 years, then I sort of realized, hey, I love what I do. And I loved creating. I loved being a carpenter. And obviously finishing my trade, completing my degree, that's when I said, I want to take this further, right? That's when I decided, okay, I'm a carpenter and I'm a good carpenter. I want to be a builder. And simultaneously at that time, I was also getting into property. My parents encouraged, especially my mother, encouraged me to get into properties, as ethnic families do. Hey, you got to look for a house. You know, you got to buy your first investment, buy a house. So I said, well, I love this industry, you know. And again, before I was a tradesman, I remember, I did end up, I was a foreman before. I think I was a 2nd or 3rd year apprentice and I became a foreman. Not because I was the best carpenter on site, because I was lucky enough that the owner of the company gave me an opportunity, right, which I'm still grateful for. And I was also lucky that the team, and it was a big team of all the employees, they kind of grew to love me, right? Call me Junior. And everyone supported me. All the older boys, it wasn't a thing of, oh, who's this young kid? By that stage, everyone had my back. And so I was in a great environment where I was learning every day. I wanted to learn every day. And from all the way from the owner of the company to the boys on the ground, everyone was lifting me up, which really excelled me. And then that sort of at the end of it, said, well, what do I do now? And I said, well, I want to get into building. And then that's when I further studied. I sort of, again, I was lucky enough to be given opportunities by company owners or companies along the way where really I was put into positions that I shouldn't have been in, Nick. Honestly, my first few, sort of senior positions when I was in my early to mid 20s, at the time going into them, I wasn't qualified enough, but I learnt in the job. So I transitioned. That's when I said, I want to be a builder now. I want to be a developer. I want to buy property. I want to get into the property market. And it was really, that's when the door opened. And there was this big wide world of construction and development. And then the next step for me was, okay, well, I've worked for subcontractors. Now I want to work for a contractor, and I want to see the commercial side and the civil side. And so I work for larger companies. I believe I started as a CA, very quickly promoted to a project manager. And essentially for sort of through my early to mid 20s, I worked for, I think 2 or 3 large contracting companies and was really given an opportunity to shine, which again, we could get into more if you want, but that was sort of it. That was what happened.
Love that. It's quite interesting, isn't it? When you think about those years that you hate, like your uncle saying, hey, I'm here to make you quit, but then you look back and go, he was doing me a favor. He was helping me. You're grateful of that terrible year. It's funny, isn't it?
They're the most valuable years of my career, mate. They laid the foundation for my successes. And mate, I've had a lot of failures too, mate. I haven't won. It wasn't linear. Success hurts, mate. And I'm going to be very honest, if it wasn't for my father and the example he set, if it wasn't for my uncles, if it wasn't for the men around me, mate, there is no way that I would have survived the failures. And I've fallen down. And I've fallen down hard, mate. There's been times I've put everything on the table and I've risked it all. And you know what? It wasn't a fairy tale, Nick. I've lost a lot. I've made mistakes. We all have. I'll say 2 things. My success through my career was very rapid. I think I've accomplished a lot in a shorter amount of time than most. And again, I've worked. I've slept on job sites. I've slept on construction sites. I've worked 7 days a week for months on end. I've worked multiple Christmas days, Christmas Eves, New Year's Days, New Year's Eves. In my 20s, before I was a father, before I became a father, in my 20s, I was sadistic. So I worked. So it was a very rapid climb, right? But there was also very steep falls, and I had to, drag my way back up. And if it wasn't for those early years and that brutality, again, is it the best way to teach? Everyone learns differently. I don't think a lot of people would respond well to it in this day and age. But for me, it's how I learn best, and it's what I'm most grateful for, because I survived what I survived, or what I'm surviving, this market, all the bad times, COVID. Running a company, keeping a company afloat through COVID, mate, all of these, and again, in development, mate, I've won and lost. In my personal life, I've won and lost. And those early years laid the foundations for me being able to be tough enough. So I am grateful, mate. And even as a leader, mate, even as a leader, I'm grateful for those lessons.
Tough times make tough people, as they say, Damien. It's one of those things that the hardest part of my career was probably the first 18 months of COVID. And I look back at that time and I go, that was the best time of my career, because it was the worst time of my career, but it was what has made me get to where I am now. Just showing up every day and not giving up, having that sort of just resilience and never say die attitude, and I think that's one of the things from obviously I'm Irish, you come from an Italian heritage, I think that they call it the immigrant edge, that you said you wouldn't go back to your father and say I quit, I just wouldn't like my mum worked 2 jobs, my dad worked 2 jobs, like, and to say, hey, that I was only working 1 job at the time, so it was more of like an embarrassment thing that I just wasn't going to give up, So I've been through that same stuff that you've alluded to, Damien. But what I'm real keen to mention as well is, moving on through your career, going through those hard times, those ups and downs. Now we're in a moment in the market where it's not as busy as where things have been in the past. We're seeing different challenges in the market right now. We're seeing problems with there's a housing crisis across Australia. It is a total. I don't think people understand how hard it is to get a housing in Australia. It's brutal.
Mate, I think the average person doesn't realise the apocalyptic nature of how the the crisis we're in. And I keep using that word apocalyptic because it is.
You mentioned we're in an apocalyptic time at this moment, Damien. So talk to me. What's actually happening right now? Guys, I'm interrupting this podcast today to give you some information as to what I actually do every single day. So I own and operate a business called Getting Executive Recruitment. We're a specialist boutique recruitment company, and we specialize purely in the pre-construction and commercial construction markets globally. We're really well known and respected for our work in estimating, cost management, quantity surveying, and contract administration. Because we're hyper niche, we don't have millions of candidates. We don't really even have thousands, but more times than not, we have the right candidate for the right job at the right time. Unlike a lot of recruitment agents out there, we are super experienced in what we do. We understand the market, we understand what makes our clients tick and our candidates tick too. Each and every single assignment we work on undergoes an extensive executive search process. It's robust and it works 100% of the time. We've also got a team of 5 researchers who map our markets out globally within our niche. They're amazing. They allow us to work fast, which saves our clients time and money too. So if you're interested in our process, drop us a message. Now back to the episode.
Look, I'm not going to tell you what's happening. I'm going to tell you what I think is happening. So I can't. There are economists out there that probably have a better understanding. There are experts and academics. You're going to get a million answers for this, right? And look, I'll be very honest in saying that there are people who are probably more qualified to give a better answer. But I'll tell you what my opinion is, okay, Nick? 10 years ago, I remember I was doing a job in St. Leonard's, and this old bloke used to walk his dog up and down the street every day. I remember, I think I was a construction manager at that point, project manager, whatever it was irrelevant. Point is, every day I was seeing him. After about a month, we got talking. His name was Darren. He was a retired builder developer. And I used to bring a little burner and I'd make my own coffee. I'd make it, you call it the caffetera. It's a little Italian coffee, right? Espressos. And every morning he'd stop and I'd pull that burner out and I'd make him a cup of coffee and we'd have a 10, 15 minute chat every day. And he said this to me, and I learned a lot from him. And he was kind of one of these mentors that I believe I was destined to cross paths with him, that God, your God, again, I'm not preaching or anything. It's my personal belief, right? Everyone has their own, but I believe that it was, I was supposed to run into Darren because he taught me a lot. Yeah. He said, Damien, cycles. What do you mean cycles? And he said, Damien, just go back. He said, rewind 100 years. He said, start there. He said, start there, work your way forward, come back to me in a week. I did it. Anyways. And the short of it is that if you do go back, and again, at the time I thought he was a bit crazy. He was a lovely old man. He had a lot of knowledge. He was a widowed old man. And I thought maybe Darren's a bit crazy. But as time moved on, I start to sort of think, you know what, he's right. And I know everyone's going to go, Damien, of course, cycles. We all know property goes in cycles. And that's not what he was referring to, right? He was referring to a larger, take a step back and take a look at it as a bigger picture. Yes, houses go up and down. Duh, we all know that's property 101. Good times and bad times. And anyways, he gave me this big spiel that go all the way back. Let's start World War I and the Depression. That being the preface to what I'm about to say. World War II, after World War II, from 1945 to 1955, in Australia, it was called the austerity period. And it was a time of recovery in this country. Okay? Around the world. From 1955 to 1975, we saw a major housing boom. And I know I've made a post about this on my LinkedIn, but I'll repeat it here. Things tapered off from 75 to the late 80s, we sort of had much more sustainable linear growth. So 75 to the late 80s, we had sort of more linear sustained growth. Late 80s, early 90s, super high interest rates. Things were bad. We were in a crisis, much like we're in now. But it was very similar to what's happening now. But after that, we saw a major housing boom. That housing boom, likened that of what happened after the austerity period. Then fast forward, go to the GFC, another crisis. For a few years, it was bad around the world. Things were terrible. 2012 came. 2012 in Sydney especially was the start of something that this country hadn't seen. Property didn't go up. Property skyrocketed, right? And for a number of reasons. So from 2012 to 2017, right? And let's talk about wealth, right? If you look at it and you look at the numbers, you'll see that the biggest chunk, we look at it as a pie graph, wealth is held in property, right? And that's where the most of the average Aussies that are asset rich, they weren't asset rich in 2008 or 2000 or 1995. Some of these people have lived in this house since 1950, 1960, 1970. All of a sudden, by 2017, they were multimillionaires. They were asset, right? Okay, from 1975 to 1995, they made 100 grand, made 200 grand. Okay. 2012 to 2017, made $1 million, $2 million, depending on where they are, even more. And so that's what Darren talked about in cycles. Right now, what's happening? We're in a housing crisis. It's a major housing crisis for a whole bunch of reasons, more than just COVID. I don't know how we're going to recover. I don't even have solid theories. I don't know how we're going to get out of it. But I do think that, and it has to happen, right? That we will see a boom. We have to see a boom. It has to happen. We have to recover from it. We can't just, not have houses. Immigrants come here and live in tents, live in boxes. So there will be a recovery. 2024, I've heard so many people say interest rates are going to go down, they're going to go up, they're going to stay the same. Forgetting that, I think 2024, my opinion is likened to 2008. So I think we're rewind. So 2011, 2012. So if you bought, I know a lot of people that bought in that GFC period and then did nothing. I have one friend who just bought 2008 to 2012. He was buying $140,000, $180,000, $200,000 homes around Mount Druitt, Blacktown area, which at the time, if we look at it socioeconomically, is a poorer area, right?
Yeah.
So he bought all these houses for 200 grand or less. By 2012, he was a millionaire. By 2017, by doing nothing, just holding these houses. And now some of those houses are worth well over $1 million. Again, in an area where I never thought I'd see $1 million price tag. Okay, but even let's say an average of 700-800 grand, he paid 150, 200 grand. He just waited. Look, how many he's got, I don't know. Once he sort of hit the number 12 mark, I don't know how many more, but even let's just use 12 as a. So I think we're in that period now, and I think 2024, I think it's a good time. This year, I think the next 12 months is a great time to buy. I think if you can buy right now, buy up as much stock as you can. Again, look, if I'm wrong and there are more qualified experts out there, tell me. I don't know everything, and I love to learn. I want to learn. If it's going to benefit me, tell me I'm wrong and why I'm wrong. Just back it up, right? But I think, what I'm trying to do personally, I'm looking at a whole lot of sites. I see multiple areas of opportunity tied in with sort of zoning reforms, transport hubs, and looking forward. Right now I'm, talking to a few people about putting JVs together, because one thing I do in the consulting as a side note is I look for these areas and these sites of opportunity. People say, Damien, they come, some of them from overseas, say, Damien, we've got a big chunk of money. What should we buy? And I say, look, and I'll look around and say, hey, look, I found this site. I've done my due diligence. I've got my team on it. I've looked at it. We can do X, Y, Z. I've got a bit of a reputation for getting the hard stuff done. So throughout my career, and that's really sort of how I started to make a name for myself, I was given the sites that everyone else said couldn't be done, or was too hard, in the too hard basket. And and I'm not talking like a house, 40, 60, 80 unit developments, which aren't major developments, but for but
yeah,
you're 10, 15, 20
you're
minutes.
100%, mate. And I think it's you know what I see what's happening in the market right now. I'm seeing so many people say immigrating to Australia. So there's been huge waves of immigration over the last two or so years. Obviously, because Australia locked down during COVID, so those migrants weren't able to come in for 2 or 3 years. Now we're seeing so many come in at once. Now there's this huge demand for rental housing, as well as people's own properties. So you'd mentioned off camera, Damien, that there's a real demand and necessity for housing in Western Australia, or Western Sydney, sorry. In Western Sydney, where most people are, realistically, most migrants are moving into those areas because they're a bit more affordable. But you've indicated to me that that's quite often not the case, and maybe they're looking at building elsewhere.
Look, with regards to Western Sydney, that's where it's the entry point to the Sydney market. For most people looking for their first home, they're going to the western suburbs. Now, if we start with New South Wales and we start with Sydney, because that's where I live and that's where I buy, that's where I build, it's where I consult, that's where, most of my clients, whether they're locally or internationally, come to me to look for sites to procure feasibility and viability stuff. So I know it. The Min's government right now, every day I go on LinkedIn, and just as an example, LinkedIn, and the amount of effort and attention I see laid upon every part of Sydney but the western suburbs. And now don't think this is because I grew up in the western suburbs. Right? Let's break it down. Immigration, apprenticeships at an all-time low, labour shortages, mass labour shortages. Nobody wants to be a tradesman anymore. Right? It's too hard. Material. What COVID did for material prices, okay? Some things, if we go back, long gone are the days of 2% rises sort of, but twice a year you'll get hit with a 2% rise on material, 2% price increase. Right? Some types of material are double, triple, quadruple the price they were 3-4 years ago, okay? So material. Councils, I think, are the biggest culprit. I mean, we could talk for hours on just my opinion and view of councils. Our approval process is awful. It is terrible. All right. Councils are so anti-development because they are filled. And I'm sorry. And if you work in council and you listen to this, and maybe you're different, but councils as institutions are awful. Okay. They are so anti-development. All right. They're filled with NIMBYs. Okay. And let's take Wallandilly Council as an example. I live out in the Wallandilly area. Like I said earlier, once I got married, my wife and I, we always had the dream of sort of having a couple of acres and building a house and so living out in the country. So we moved out towards Camden. So we're in the Wallandilly LGA. The amount of land with the potential for subdivision, all right, is astronomical. There's land everywhere. Now, I know we can't cut up everything, but we're not using it for sort of mass agriculture anymore, are we? Okay, what are we using it for? You drive through Camden, you drive through Picton, you see land left and right of you, and you know what? You know how much of that land has been earmarked for development, and do you know how many developers are right now fighting to have things approved or rezoned? I had a little bit of land, Wallandilly Council. I had 5 acres. I had a 200-metre frontage. I had R3 behind me, so my reboundary was R3. And looking at the property, I had R3 on the side. So I had a brand new estate behind me, and there wasn't new, but there was houses next to me. 200-metre frontage. Took me a year to buy this property, right? And I remember they had just upgraded the infrastructure at the front. Under the road, there was brand new mains. Services had been put in. So it could very easily branch out. Even you could do 5 1-acre lots. Look, long story short, I rang up council. I said, and this was a word-for-word answer they gave to me. I said, blah, blah, blah. Why did you stop the zoning now? The answer to me was, well, we had to stop it somewhere. And for another 12 months, I spoke to architects and certifiers and town planners about getting this rezoned. Okay, so they went 12 months. And they said it was going to cost me $100,000 and another 12 months of getting it to a point where we can get it to the LEC and they might push it over the line because they had no intention of rezoning. They said, well, no, we've already rezoned and we're not going to look at rezoning for an indefinite amount of time, maybe in 5 years, 20 years, we don't know. And what was ironic was they had told me because they are only going to look at rezoning when the population demands it, when the growth of population, all right, or the amount of people coming in, to the Wallandilly LGA, sort of necessitates growth. I rang up a town planner in that year and we were talking about it. And he said to me, Damien, those targets, those population targets, we hit a year ago. So what council had projected for 5 years worth of growth, that 5-year number had already been hit. So the zoning that they had completed for these targets. So they said once we hit those, we might look at rezoning some more land. And they still, I'm bringing all these arguments up with the right people. Well, what I thought to be the right people. I was a bit younger at the time. I said, I want to subdivide this land. I can provide, okay, I didn't need to put 40 houses. I just wanted to do 5 1-acre lots. And the amount of time wasted speaking to different people, different roles, different capacities, different amounts of authority, the same arguments, trying to make justifications, like trying to push this through. Mind you, I'm still 12 months away from going to the LEC, right? This is the very beginning. I spoke to, there was one architect who said, look, it's going to be hard, but it's doable, right? I'd spoken to maybe a dozen architects and it was too hard. It was a very easy site to subdivide, but it was, again, dealing with rezoning was the biggest one. And at the end of the day, you get on the phone and these people, no, we're not, because it's an institution and the people within that institution don't care, right? Because it's always somebody else's job. And I'm sure you know what I mean. When you drop a pen on the floor, if there's 100 people around, no one's going to pick it up because it's always the other bloke's job. It's always someone else's job. People within these institutions don't care. And then a lot of the people with Wallandilly, as an example, people within Wallandilly Council, most of those decision makers have been there for decades. And I get it. They grew up and there was cows and horses everywhere. I love cows. I love horses. We've got sheep. It's great. I love the whole rural lifestyle. Right. I play pretend farmer on the weekend with my kids. All right. I put my hat on and my flannel and I pretend to be, and the kids love it. Right. But they have to understand that the place they grew up in 50 years ago is long gone. All right. We can't afford to have hundreds and thousands of acres for nothing. Fair enough if that land is producing if that land is contributing right to the mechanism of society, we're producing food, we're producing vegetables, cotton. I don't care anything. Fair enough. But when that land is doing nothing and council's argument is, no, we can't rezone it because it's like when you ask a kid an answer, you ask a child an answer and you get hit with, because. It's such an immature answer. And you know why? Because nobody in the institution cares. And the problem, it's going to stay that way. So approvals come in, they don't go out because one, it's filled with NIMBYs. Again, this is pure speculation, right? It's all allegedly, it's all speculation coming from me, right? It's full of NIMBYs. It's full of people that are anti-development. Now remember, I have a saying, everyone's pro-development when it's their own home. And every time I've had someone come up to me, I remember in my younger days as a site manager, and I would get abused by some local mates. Sometimes I had great neighbours, sometimes I had terrible neighbours, and they would fight with every breath to get to try to make sure that building wasn't approved. Then once it starts building, they make. And I'll tell you a story that allegedly happened. Okay, I'll tell you a story that allegedly happened. All right, I've had some horrible neighbours, and they come up to me and they yell and scream and abuse me. Mind you, I'm doing a job. I was abused once by the mayor of, I think it's in St. Leonard's. I was in St. Leonard's. I was out the front of a job site. Mind you, I was doing my job and we were doing traffic. I was helping my traffic controllers. I was out the front and I think I was the site manager of that project. This would have been, my mid to late 20s. And I remember this woman drove by and there was a ranger. I was on very good terms with all the parking rangers. Tip, if you're a builder, always get your parking rangers on side. Give them a beer on a Friday. Give them a case of beer every now and again. Tip for the builders. So one of the parking rangers happened to be on the job, and he'd stop in once a week, and he happened to be there. This woman drove up, now lollipop man there with the stop sign, and we were reversing some plant out of the job. So it was we're talking a less than 5 minute interruption, a less than 5 minute delay of traffic. Mind you, this is in a residential street, not an arterial road, not a major road, just like a little road in the suburbs, right, near a train station. She had to stop for 3-4 minutes, pulls down the window and abuses me. Now, she didn't see the parking ranger. The parking ranger turns to me and says, "That's the mayor." I'm like, "What?" "That's the mayor." So I ended up bringing counselling, complaining. I said, well, I said, and I thought, she was an older woman. We're all doing our job, mate. We were at the time doing our jobs.
Yeah.
And so everyone's anti-development until it's their own house. And I guarantee you, if the mayor was building her house, right? This again, we're talking a while ago, it might be a new mayor, I don't know.
Yeah.
But and if she's building her house, I guarantee you she wants her house built. So everyone's pro-development when it's their own home. But councils, mate, they have archaic view, archaic intention, right? They don't want to see any change. All right, the mechanisms within councils are outdated. All right, we create jobs for jobs, we create red tape for red tape, and it all achieves nothing. All right, the processes, the procedure, protocol, call it whatever you want, but the mechanisms within those councils, all right, that are in charge, all right, and their job, their duty is to contribute, all right, is to contribute to the growth of, to nurture that LGA. All right, direct it and steer it, and then obviously collectively we grow as a state, right? That's every council's sort of
100%. I think there's so many. I mean, there's so much of construction and development and property that's wrapped up in politics. From councils, and I mean councils are archaic. So I guess moving on. I guess in terms of there's so much of construction that's wrapped up in politics, and there's so much of property and development that's wrapped up in politics. I think what you said, everyone's pro-development when it is their own home. I think that's a great sort of slogan nearly for this episode. I guess what needs to be done, Damien, sort of coming towards at the end of this show, what needs to be done to start making things, for action to start happening, for things to start moving forward, for things to start feeling better?
In my opinion, first, we need the Minns government and the Albanese government need to do something. I'm sick of the commissions. I'm sick of the reports. We all are well aware of what's wrong. So we need leaders that are going to make decisions. Or Minns and Albanese need to pull their finger out and man up and take some responsibility, okay? Everyone is in a race to be second. Okay, it's simple as that. Nobody wants to be first. Everyone wants to be second. And that's what's happening right now. Nobody wants to be the first one just in case, all right? Because no matter what happens, there is going to be a portion of, with Sydney, okay? With Brisbane, with Melbourne, it'd be the same thing, but especially with Sydney, because essentially we're landlocked. If you look at Sydney, we are landlocked, all right? We're wrapped in by national park and forest and whatnot. So, and we're almost at capacity now. Okay, if you zoom out on a Google map, you'll see what I mean. Now, nobody wants to be the first one to do something, because there is going to be a portion. There is going to be a number of people that are going to be unhappy. People are always going to be unhappy when it comes to development. All right, I'm a developer. All right, I'm not Harry Triguboff. All right, I'm well into my career as a builder, as a leader. All right, as an executive. All right, and I'm early into my career as a developer. And again, I have good intention. I'm not an evil person. I started with nothing. I'm a blue collar guy, and I come from a family of immigrants. All right, so not all developers are these evil people, these evil maniacal people, right? But we need developers and we need builders, right? And at least with me that I'm a genuine guy and I'm trying to do some good, okay? But nobody wants to be first because someone's going to get angry with the decision. But councils need to be overhauled. Either if they're not going to be overhauled, then state government needs to take responsibility, all right? We've got PCAs. Now, PCAs in the mid to late 90s, I think it was 96, 97 or something, PCAs became a thing. And they were brought in, really primarily to help with, to take a load off councils. Now, again, the Building Commission has been brought in. And David, who I believe is now retiring, but the Building Commission was brought in to overhaul the industry. And this was as a result of, I think, the Opal Towers and the towers in Homebush and Parramatta, or wherever they were. And again, even that, I think that was sort of blown out of proportion to a large extent. It was very much the government had to show that they did something, right? There had to be a response, and everyone blamed the certifiers. Now, it's not just everyone, it's not the certifiers' fault. It's there's a lot of people, there's a lot of authorities, there's a lot that goes into building something, and there's a lot that goes into, and there's a lot of people involved when things go bad too, right? So it's not just the certifier. So anyhow, the commission came in, and the government said to everyone, "We're going to get the certifiers. We are going to," and no. So then what happened was certifiers got hammered, which I think it's very important. I think the Building Commissioner is doing a great job. I think the Anti-Crime Commission doing a great job. I think we need to clear the shit out of the industry. There is a lot of shit in our industry, all right, that we need to do something about. There's a lot of dodgy developers, a lot of dodgy builders, and I really hope that we tear through. And I think we're not doing it fast enough, all right, because they're also contributing to the crisis in their own way, and they've contributed to the Building Commission is, as a result of, right? But it's more than just the Building Commission and dodgy builders. So, but PCAs, they copped a lot that they shouldn't have copped, right? Now, it's harder for PCAs. So the whole point of PCAs, helping overburdened councils, it's now redundant, right? Because now PCAs are overburdened. I think if you look at the last year, development application submittal was up 10%. But coming out the other end was down 20% to a decade low. Yeah. So a decade low of what's being approved in a time when we are in a crisis and need it the most. So the state government either needs to create another channel of, development application, all right, for us to actually, fight and submit. So, hey, we want to get something built. Immigration. I saw yesterday, and I've made a post about it. Yoga instructors and dog walkers are a priority over some trades.
Seen that.
When we're vetting, so you saw it, man. I went red. I was furious. Right?
What is that about? Like, I just don't get that. Like, surely anyone with common sense, like, you don't even need to have a head on you to realize that's a stupid thing to do.
You know what? But somebody made that decision, and this is my point. Our leadership, the parties in power, who, and again, mate, I'm fighting with every fibre of my being to not swear. But, mate, somebody made that decision. Somebody overlooked that and wrote that off. Clearly, that is proof that the Albanese government, right, and the Labor Party are so out of touch. And all of them, I'm telling you, every speech and report and post I hear, it's all fluff. They are empty promises, mate. Okay, we got the zoning reforms that 13th of May they passed, and that was something, but it's not enough, mate. And they were a long time coming. The airport took 20 years, the second airport, Badgerys Creek. And again, now, where's our infrastructure? Took you 20 years to get that airport to put a shovel in the ground. We have no infrastructure out there. Where I'm Wallandilly, all right? So, down Richmond way, Richmond towards Windsor, again in Sydney, we saw, over the last sort of 10 years, tens of thousands of homes being built. Right, new suburbs, we saw rezoning, we saw subdivision, civil work everywhere, okay? Right, and that's great. The last big chunk of land is sort of towards, as you're going to Goulburn, down near where I am. Now, where's the infrastructure? We all know that we need housing. We know that we're going to need to build houses. And yet the Labor Party puts is still consistently, every time that they get elected, they put a stop on infrastructure. They always put a stop on infrastructure. But you're telling me we need houses, and you're telling me you're going to do something about it. Where's my infrastructure? The M9, again, that's how many decades in the making. We need it. And, there's a saying I like, do you know what the poor people tax is, Mick? Do you know what the poor people tax is? Okay, no. So the poor people tax. So for me to come from where I'm living now, and again, I live there by choice, right? For me to come from home to where I consult, cost me $20 in tolls, $20. Most people can't afford in Sydney to live near where they work. So we have to live further out and we get slugged on the way to work.
Yeah.
And that's just a little example, but something needs to be done. So immigration, we need to prioritise skilled immigrants because, again, and I don't know if the Albanese government and the Minns government and just maybe every politician that sits in a seat right now understands that we have apprenticeships at an all-time low. Now, I think personally, I'd love to speak in schools. I've tried to reach out to guest lecture and guest speak at universities because my story, and I know we didn't talk too much about it, but I've actually got some really, I personally think some really amazing stories, some really, really cool stories that I was hoping to sort of get some out. But how fruitful my career has been, okay, for growth, not for me as a person, all right? But apprenticeships are at an all-time low. We can't find labour. And then you want dog walkers over bricklayers, whatever. Okay, so immigration councils, mate, we need obviously land and infrastructure. We need infrastructure. But this is but mate, it comes back to we need so much to be done. And then there's interest rates. We've got to talk about money, right? Now, I understand interest rates on their own aren't the end of the world. You know, if immigration was sort of in order, we were getting skilled immigrants in. If there was infrastructure ahead of all the subdivisions, so infrastructure shouldn't be happening once we start wanting to build houses. It should have already been built, right? If infrastructure was in place, if we had smooth, quick, efficient development application process, right? Interest rates on their own wouldn't be a big deal. But when you go and grab 6, 7, whatever percent, 5, 6, 7% interest rates, okay, to the average bloke, when the average mortgage is like $1 million, high interest rates, cost of living, fuel, tolls, and you bundle it all up. Where do we start? And I mean, look, I'd happily, if I always joke, I say, look, if Chris Minns ends up hearing this, mate, if whoever you have in charge of making decisions regarding infrastructure and zoning, all right, and getting things built, if he doesn't have the courage, I'll put it politely, if he doesn't have the courage to make a decision and be the bad guy, then I will. I'll happily step in. If I have to, excuse my French, but if I have to piss off 20% of people, so 80% of people can afford a home and live the Australian dream, mate, I'll piss them off. I'll do what needs to be done. Now, look, it's not a political campaign, man. I'm happy being a builder developer. But what I'm getting at is, where do we start, Nick? Like, I could talk for the next 4 or 5 hours about just what I think,
that's the thing. That's the thing. There's so many things to juggle. Like, I mean, if I was sort of looking at it from my perspective, is that there just seems to be across the board too many chiefs. There's just too many chiefs, and no one willing to make make a decision. And that's across residential, infrastructure, health, transport. It goes from literally a wide sweeping across the board. Everyone's sitting in no man's land at the minute, and so we need quicker decisions, streamlined policies. As you said, enough of the reports. Everyone knows where we're at and what needs to be done. What would you say to finish the show, Damien? I mean, trying to sort of look at this as an overall view of the industry, your career, construction. What's one thing that you're quite positive about or looking forward to within the industry?
One thing that I'm looking forward to, or that I'm positive about, I'm going to be honest, Mick, there's not much that I am positive about right now. Times are bad. Times are tough. The industry's struggling. I want to be happy about something, but when I look across the board, what can I be happy about? You know what? People often joke, I should have been a doctor. I should have been a barrister. No, mate, you could offer me 10 times more than what I'm making, mate, and say, but you have to change careers. I love being a builder, mate. And it's a very personal thing. And one thing that I wanted to mention, and I haven't, and I'm going to keep it very short in saying what made me fall in love with this industry is the chaos, all right? And people often try to control it, but you can't. You have to learn to steer it, right? And so I love this industry, mate. I fell in love with the chaos. I fell in love with the blood and the sweat and the temper. I fell in love. It was like a river, right? It was like a raging river. It was just uncontrollable force. And at the end of it, you create something, and so much has to happen for you to create that. And people often give the average, the media and the average person often gives credit to architects and designers and engineers, right? Fine. But the truth is, mate, like, it's the boys on the ground. It's the builders. It's the subbies. Yeah, the architects, they design something, they play a piece, but, magazines and accolades and awards. Where are the awards for the bloke whose son has cancer and he has to work 6 days a week and do every hour of overtime he can so he can put his son through the treatment he needs? And that's a true story, right? That's a true story. I met that man. His 5-year-old son had cancer. Still brings tears to my eyes when I hear it. And every day that bloke came to work with a smile on his face, right? What about the award for the bloke? I knew a Serbian guy once, right? He fled Serbia because of the wars. He told me a story. I think he was 19 or so, and they were locked in a church, right? And for 3 days they fought. And he said they spent every bullet they had. By the third day they had nothing left. And most of his friends lay dead around him and they were surrounded, right? And they were shooting through the windows. And anyways, he said, I had nothing but a pistol left and one magazine, and that's all I had. I had no food. I had no water. I had the clothes on my back and a pistol. And he said, my friends were dead around me. There was a few of us left and we had to make a run for it. And he ran for days, right? You know how many stories? I know a Mongolian eye surgeon, right, who came here to still fix, right? He was an eye surgeon in Mongolia, but he came here because he has kids and they needed a better life, right? And he's away from his kids. He doesn't see his kids. And I couldn't not see my kids for a couple of days. This bloke doesn't see his kids for 6 months, 12 months at a time, but he has to, and he sends that money back. So where are the awards for all of them, mate? And that's something, mate, there's a big disparity. There's a big disconnect between how things are built, who builds them, all right, the mechanism, call it whatever you want, all right, and it's tiered, right? And I always say it's tiered. And pick up that magazine. Wow, look at that amazing architect, that design, beautiful home, right? And don't take this as and this has nothing to do, and I don't want to bring up unions or anything, all right? And I'm not going to talk about my stance on unions, all right? This isn't about fighting for extra pay or something like that. It's not. But that's what I fell in love with, mate. I fell in love with the process, Mick. And I don't care if I don't win one award in my career, but I fell in love with the process, because to create something, everyone walks past and says, wow, the architect such and such designed that. I walk past and I see on all of my sites every day, first thing I do is shake everyone's hand. Everyone's hand, no matter how big the job, 20, 30, 40 levels, I shake everybody's hand, right? And I've done this for years of my career, right? Everyone's hand. Like that's there that morning, whoever's there, I'm not joking, it might take me an hour. It might take me 5 minutes, right? And it's always funny because people are often confused by my stance on it, because when the party's thrown and the red tape is cut and this big, beautiful structure is presented to everyone, and everyone looks at it and says, wow, how beautiful is it? And I'm often walking away. It doesn't. It's not. It's not that it doesn't look beautiful, but the part that I love isn't the finished product. It's the process to get there. The stories that I've heard, the things that I've experienced, they all made me. Every single one of those stories, I could tell you stories for days. Everyone that I have ever led or managed or worked alongside, I have always learned their story. Always learned their story. And that's what
you know what it's you know what I was just going to say, Damien. You know what? There's two things that I'm hearing from you that to summarize this conversation. It's people and stories. You've throughout this conversation, you've been talking about your uncles, your father, the foreman, the guys on site, the ones who are literally the chippies, the ones who are literally doing the work, and then the stories that you learn from them that you pass on over time. It's a real sort of immigrant thing that you get. You hear about how things were done back in the homeland and all that sort of stuff, and I'm getting a real sense from that from you today, Damien. So. It's been a real honor to have you on the show, mate. It's been really fascinating hearing your story, your background, and your thoughts on the industry. If there's anyone out there that wants to connect with you or to learn more about what you do, is the best way to get in touch through LinkedIn?
Look, LinkedIn is probably the best way if anyone wants to reach out. And I'll say this: if there's any young project managers or young builders that are looking for a mentor, and again, it's not a business spiel or asking for money. Like if there are any young guys or girls out there that just want a bit of help and a bit of guidance, reach out to me, and I'll do my best to do what I can. Something I've done for a long time. Saturdays, if I work Saturdays, the front seat is always open. You can always jump in, ask questions, spend a bit of time with me. I'll do whatever I can. I want to make a change to this industry. Like I said, it's more than just about building and making a living. And you know what? I'd like to, everyone, we all want to make $1 from it, but I actually want to make a difference. And you'd be amazed at how hard it is to actually try and get out there into the schools and unis. But look, reach out, LinkedIn. You can shoot me a message and we'll talk on there. But my parting message, Mick, would be for future leaders, builders, project managers, developers, is work hard, empathy and boundaries. Empathy without boundaries is often weakness. And I say that because I've often been too empathetic and I've been taken advantage of. I've learned the hard way many, many times. Boundaries without empathy can often become arrogance. That's not how you build relationships. Yes. You need to be empathetic, but you need to set boundaries for yourself. You need to learn to say no. And this I'll say as politely as possible. Work hard. And I know it's going to be brutal. And I know that for a long time, you're not going to see any results or rewards. But I promise you, you sacrifice and you suffer and you will yield results. So that's my message to the young men and women out there that want to become PMs or builders or developers or leaders, executives, whatever your goal or aspiration is. If there are any politicians watching, make a decision, or let me do it for you, or let someone else who's got the courage to do it. And other than that, I didn't want to make this about a business. When I came on here, I didn't want this to become sort of I see some podcasts and people often turn it into a bit of a business spiel. They often use it as a platform to, hey, let me build your house, or hey, let me sell you something. And I was very determined to make sure it wasn't that. Look, at the end of the day, if you trust me as a builder, that's great. That's wonderful. What I wanted this to be about was just conveying, one, my message of that I'm not happy about the state of things and the leaders and the lack of action. And two, I just wanted to get that message out to sort of young, aspiring builders and leaders. So that's what I really wanted to do this for, Mick. Right? So I just wanted to make that clear that, but in saying that, I do love my job and I do think I'm a pretty kick-ass. Scrap that. Sounds unprofessional.
Yeah, you know what? No, I think you've done an unreal job today, Damien. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. You're a kick-ass construction manager, and there's going to be loads of people who can learn from this. So thanks, mate. Really appreciate it.
Mick, before we go, can I just tell one quick story? There's one story I wanted to tell quickly. On my first trip to China, so in my efforts to learn as much as I could about the industry and how to build, right, and I would learn from every resource available. When I first started going to China for work, for business, I got a backpack. I loaded 100 packets of cigarettes, so 10 cartons. It was like a duffel bag. I got in a taxi and I was in Guangzhou. Any major construction site or civil project I could see in the horizon, I'd tell the taxi driver to go there. And for days, I was getting taxied around Guangzhou and I would stand outside these construction sites and I would use the cigarettes and maybe a few dollars to bribe my way into these construction sites. And I would eventually sort of gain the trust of the foreman, and we'd try and sort of through broken English, broken Mandarin, and the translator, I'd get shown around the construction site because I was so determined to learn how they built. Because in terms of management, the Asian countries are by far the best managers. Mm-hmm. All right, but when I say that, it's because they leverage cultural phenomena. All right, so it's also about there being a subordinate attitude. But I'm not going to get into that. What I wanted to get into is the fact that I was so committed to learn and become a better builder that I literally went to another country, bribed my way into construction sites, and asked as many questions as I could of as many people as I could. And I have done that in many places. And I've had the great fortune of either working or consulting on multiple continents. And I have made that effort to learn as much as I can, wherever I can, to become the best builder I can. And again, to those young guys out there, if you're ambitious, all right, and you're willing, you have to go that extra mile. You have to be a little bit crazy. You have to be a little bit different. You have to think outside the box. Remember, we build the box. All right. Don't think inside it. We build it. So that's it.
Damien, absolute legend. Thank you for being on the show today, mate. And yeah, that was awesome.
Thank you so much, Mick. Talk soon, mate. Bye.
Before you go today, guys, I'm just going to ask you to do one thing. Can you please go to Apple right now or Spotify right now and just give us those 5 stars? Hit that 5-star button. It makes such a difference you wouldn't believe. The whole idea of this show is to inspire, educate and motivate our listeners. And we can only do that if we're getting the best guests. The best guests want to see data. They want to see information. They want to see how many listeners that we get. And so all of this stuff is really, really important. So if you can just literally go and do that today, if you enjoy the show, just go and hit that 5-star button. It makes such a difference. I hope you've enjoyed the show. We're going to continue to push this out there every Monday. So if you can, hit that 5-star button. And if you can't, even share it with a friend. Go on to WhatsApp, flick it on to your crew. Guys, thank you so much for listening. On to next week.